It was late morning, I'll say between 4:35 in the morning. I was asleep. All of a sudden, I hear a lot of banging, bang, bang, bang.
In the early morning hours of October 17th, 2017, the FBI raided the wrong house containing a completely innocent family.
This is not, some dinged up apartment somewhere in the middle of a city. This is a nice house with a nice manicured yard and a garage and landscaping and everything that you'd expect in your sort of suburban neighborhood. And so it's definitely not the kind of place you might be picturing if I'm telling you, hey, the FBI was trying to raid a drug dealer's house and they missed it by a block and raided an innocent family. Gabe's across the hall hiding under his sheets while FBI agents have assault rifles pointed at him, a 7-year-old. They're telling him to keep his hands up. They're telling everyone to shut up.
The guns that was all in my face, it was like 2 guns put in my face at like one time.
I remember being on the floor and I'm looking up to see what's going on, and I see a bunch of like automatic weapons pointed at me, and I'm like, oh man.
They're asking what his address is. He tells them his address, and then just like that, the FBI just goes quiet.
So when they realized they had the wrong house, it was no remorse. It was just like, everybody rally up and let's just go to the right house.
As all the lights are flashing and stuff, you can see the light reflecting off the reflective numbers on the mailbox in the officer's body cam. So it's not like they would have had to move plants out of the way or getting into a particularly dangerous situation to see the address. They just had to look.
The FBI refused to take responsibility. When the family tried to sue, the courts gave the FBI complete immunity. Now, after almost 8 years of litigation, their attorney, Patrick Giacomo of the Institute for Justice, is going to argue this case before the United States Supreme Court on Tuesday of next week. The stakes are high. If he loses, we all lose, because the FBI, the ATF, Postal Inspection Service, the IRS, whoever, federal police officers can violate your constitutional rights all day long because they will have a constitution-free bubble around them. And there's nothing you can do about it. You cannot sue them. But thankfully, we have this world-class national nonprofit law firm who represents this family and many other families at no cost. These cases can cost millions of dollars. The IJ needs our help. If you can, please use the donation link below to help fund this fight for our constitutional rights.
All of these agents right now are kind of walking around with a little constitution-free bubble around them. And if we are successful in this case, we'll be able to pop that bubble.
As both a content creator and a lawyer, I can assure you that your private data is being collected and traded online by shady data brokers who then create shadow profiles on you that include a frightening amount of personal information. Your private information is then used without your knowledge or your consent by businesses, banks, and the government. That's why I use a product called Incogn that not only tracks down the data brokers that have your information, but they also have that information and private data completely removed. Even for me, it would take hundreds of hours of my time to do this by myself. Instead, Incogn just does it for me, working continuously in the background. I basically just check it from time to time to see how much data they found and then remove. As of today, Incogn has located my private information with 533 different data brokers. And to date, they've had that data deleted with 493 of those data brokers, with 40 others still in progress. And now you can get an extra level of protection with Incogn's custom removals feature in the unlimited plan and the family unlimited plan. You can point to any website where your personal information is publicly visible, and one of their privacy agents will get it removed. So check out Incogn using the link below, or go to incogn.com/civil to get an exclusive 60% off. That's incogn.com/civil and use code civil, or click the link below to take your personal data off the market. Now let's get back to the video. You may remember Patrick Giacomo from some of my other videos, not the least of which was the family court judge search case. He was the one who argued that case successfully before the Fourth Circuit. I got to watch his argument there in person, and it was impressive.
In 2020, now former West Virginia family court judge Louise Goldston led the search and seizure of property in my client's private home over his strenuous objection and repeatedly threw threats to have him arrested if he did not allow the search party to conduct the search that it did.
I really do think he's one of the best civil rights lawyers in the nation. He generously took a break from preparing for these Supreme Court arguments to give us the inside details prior to the big argument on Tuesday. What was this family's experience when in 2017 the FBI in the middle of the night raids their home?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those situations that we all feel like we can empathize with to some degree because we've watched movies about police raiding homes, but I don't think you can really put yourself in the shoes of someone and how truly terrifying it is to be, awakened by some horrifyingly loud explosions and men running into the house with guns and black tactical gear and shouting and screaming, and just the sort of complete confusion that you would have waking up to this happening. And so that's what happened to the Martin family. So we have Trina and her then partner Toi, and then Trina's 7-year-old son Gabe. And so in addition to just the fear and trauma of, literally flashbang grenades, the door being kicked in, screaming, you not knowing that it's even police, because whether they said they were or not, you were asleep. You're now half naked, trying to figure out what's going on. As a mother, Trina's trying to rush to her 7-year-old son Gabe's room, who's hiding under the sheets. And Toi, as the protector of the family, is pulling Trina into the walk-in closet where the guns are to protect themselves from whatever is going on.
For me, on my side, I basically just heard a loud bang. I was asleep. The bang was so loud and so abrupt. I just remember landing on my feet out of the bed. It startled me. I remember landing on my feet, looking around, trying to fix it, but just negative stuff. So immediately, that's what came to my brain. Someone had broken into the house, and I need to protect everyone.
And so all of this is just complete chaos, completely terrifying. It's happening within a split second, and you're making all these decisions, or you're trying to. And so Trina's deciding, do I go to Gabe? Do I let myself be pulled into the closet with Toi? Now we're in the closet. Toi's deciding, do I grab the gun? Trina's deciding, should we grab the guns?
At that time, we were in a closet. The door was closed. He was reaching for his gun at the time because we thought someone was breaking into the home.
Thankfully here, no guns were grabbed. And I think Trina and Toi will both tell you that if they had grabbed the guns, they would have been killed, because shortly thereafter, the FBI does burst in.
So they pulled me out of the closet, walked me through the bathroom, and then they threw me on the floor in the bedroom. I remember being on the floor, and I'm looking up to see what's going on, and I see a bunch of automatic weapons pointed at me, and I'm like, oh man.
I was 7 years old when the raid happened. The guns that was all in my face, it was like 2 guns pointed in my face at one time. So I was just really nervous. That was my main focus. I didn't want to get killed. My safety came first at that moment. So yeah.
At some point, it becomes clear enough that it's the FBI and not just some burglars. But that was kind of the initial emotional reaction here. Meanwhile, Gabe's across the hall hiding under his sheets while FBI agents have assault rifles pointed at him, a 7-year-old. They're telling him to keep his hands up. They're telling everyone to shut up. They're interrogating Toi now. He's handcuffed on the floor. Obviously, everyone's in night clothes. Trina's wearing just a t-shirt. This is all just something that you really can't understand what it would be like to be under the stress of this momentary situation of the most visceral fear that you could ever imagine. So they're shouting questions at Toi. They're asking what his address is. He tells them his address. And then just like that, the FBI just goes quiet because they realize now they kicked in the wrong door. In suburban Atlanta, in a nice house, in a nice neighborhood. That's another thing that I think is important for people to be able to empathize with. This is not, some dinged up apartment somewhere in the middle of a city. This is a nice house with a nice manicured yard and a garage and landscaping and everything that you'd expect in your sort of suburban neighborhood. And so it's definitely not the kind of place you might be picturing if I'm telling you, hey, the FBI was trying to raid a drug dealer's house and they missed it by a block and raided an innocent family. Not that that would excuse their behavior, but it's just all the more inexcusable here.
So when they realized they had the wrong house, it was no remorse. It was just like, everybody rally up and let's just go to the right house.
I guess the officer in charge, he came back And he apologized and left me with his card.
This is a situation where literally, and this keeps happening. We have a whole spate of IJ cases where police go to the wrong house, and usually the reason they went to the wrong house is because they never bother to check the address that's posted on the house, or in this case on the mailbox, before they decide to kick in the door. And I just have never been able to understand why that would make sense, even from the perspective of law enforcement's own safety. But it's certainly something we should expect more from police executing a search warrant than we expect from DoorDash delivering Chinese food. And yet the courts basically treat the police with less accountability than we would expect from DoorDash, who you demand to get a refund from.
What mistakes were made here by the FBI that led them to the completely wrong house?
Yeah, so here, what the FBI ultimately said as far as how they ended up at the wrong address was that the lead officer for the SWAT team said that he put into his personal GPS the correct address, but then it took them to the wrong address. And instead of checking again the clearly posted mailbox with the number, they just went ahead and went in. Now, I don't know if you believe that. I'm very skeptical, and I'll tell you that in this case, once the lawsuit was filed and that GPS device was demanded through discovery, the officer had conveniently thrown it away after the incident. And so there was no opportunity to recreate what he claims to have happened here. But in any event, I think it's, again, takes us back to the scenario of delivering a pizza, where, of course, you might follow your GPS to a house, but even before you get out of your car to walk up to the front door and drop it off, you'd check and see if you could spot the house number. And here you definitely could. And we only have body cam from the Atlanta Police Department that showed up after the fact and actually sort of chatted with the family and said, yeah, we knew that they were serving warrants today, but we knew that this house wasn't the right one. And you have the body cam from them. You don't have it from any of the FBI agents. And there you can just see, like, as all the lights are flashing and stuff, you can see the light reflecting off the reflective numbers on the mailbox in the officer's body cam. So it's not like they would have had to move plants out of the way or getting into a particularly dangerous situation to see the address. They just had to look. And they couldn't even do that before they decided to execute this warrant.
Now, the legal issue here is not qualified immunity, which applies to state and local officers. 80 years ago, Congress created a statute allowing citizens to sue federal employees who cause us personal injuries or property damage. It's called the Federal Tort Claims Act. Then in 1973, when the war on drugs began and federal cops started busting into people's homes without warrants, really not a whole lot different than what happened to this family here, Congress amended that statute to make sure that it specifically would apply in a wrong house raid situation. I will link Patrick's full brief to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it's crazy in the weeds, highly complicated, and actually Patrick does a great job of summarizing it here. So the Supreme Court is deciding whether the Federal Tort Claims Act allows Trina's family to sue over the FBI raiding their home mistakenly. Can you just briefly sort of describe or explain what the Federal Tort Claims Act is and why the 11th Circuit's ruling basically blocks that lawsuit? And what problem does that pose for victims of federal misconduct?
Yeah, so I kind of want to start at the big picture level and say, without really meaning to, at the Institute for Justice, we just accumulated 3 wrong house raid cases at the same time over about a 6-month period a year or two ago. And it wasn't a specific issue that we had been focused on, and we became focused on it because we saw, wow, like, what are the odds that these 3 cases all pop up in different places in the country with different legal issues. And in every single case, there's been some judicially created doctrine that's precluded the victims from having a remedy. And here, because you're dealing with federal officers, you have to fight a very different battle in the form of finding a cause of action at all. So in those other cases, you have a statute called Section 1983 that allows you to sue officials who act under color of state law. But when you're dealing with officers who act under color of federal law, there's no statute. And so the last thread of accountability for federal police is in a provision of the statute called the Federal Tort Claims Act that says that you can sue federal police if they commit one of 6 enumerated intentional torts. And intentional torts are just sort of harms that someone's intentional action creates. So if you think assault, battery, false imprisonment, false arrest, those are intentional torts. They're the ones that are listed here in the statute. If a federal officer commits those torts, there's a statute that says you can actually sue him. And so this is, again, the last thread of federal accountability. And contra to what the Supreme Court has said with the Bivens stuff, where they said, oh, it's not the role of the judiciary to imply cause of action under the Constitution. We need a statute. We don't have to worry about that here because Congress did pass a statute. And in fact, the statute was amended in the 1970s during the war on drugs, when the Nixon administration's drug agents were kind of going a little bit too nuts and kicking down doors to find hippies. Because they did some wrong house raids pursuant to that in Collinsville, Illinois, outside of St. Louis, Congress got whipped up because there was a ton of media attention on these wrong house raids, and they amended the Federal Tort Claims Act to allow you to bring these claims against federal officers. And so that's the backdrop of where we are. And so this case is the case from Collinsville. This is the quintessential case. This is the case that caused Congress to amend this statute and go through all the effort that takes. And nevertheless, when the Martin family brings it, the government, which is always represented by the Department of Justice in these cases, says, oh, actually, there's another exception to that act that applies, and it precludes you from bringing what is essentially the case Congress amended the FTCA to allow. And so what the 11th Circuit fundamentally did was say, we're going to protect Congress from its own decisions where it waived its sovereign immunity and accepted liability here, because we think that there should be protections for the government in this case, even though the FBI raided the wrong house. And so really what we're arguing about is whether sovereign immunity comes in here despite the fact that Congress said it shouldn't.
Is the government claiming that sovereign immunity protects it from these lawsuits?
Yes. So the government here is saying, you just can't sue us. It doesn't matter what happened in your case. We have sovereign immunity, and so you can't touch us in our courts. And the argument is simple, which is this is a claim brought under a federal statute, the Federal Tort Claims Act. And for that reason, the Supremacy Clause can't restrict it, because the Supremacy Clause is supposed to make sure that when they conflict in the right settings, federal law overcomes state law. But here we're dealing only with federal law, even though the FTCA is drawing on state tort principles. And so that's the first thing. No Supremacy Clause. It makes no sense to apply the Supremacy Clause to a federal statute. Now, the second thing, this is where the government's arguments really make the rubber meet the road, is that they say, okay, sure, you have this law enforcement proviso, and sure, it sounds exactly like your case. But there's this other exception in the FTCA called the discretionary function exception. And it says that if someone's performing a discretionary function, there's no cause of action under the FTCA, and sovereign immunity protects us. And because the courts have never quite figured out what the heck discretionary function is supposed to mean in the past 80 years, this court should just allow that exception to swallow this affirmative statement that law enforcement officers can be sued that was enacted by Congress 30 years after that. And so our position, of course, is no, this discretionary function exception doesn't cover this sort of behavior. And I won't get into that because it's very, very in the weeds. But two, and this is much easier to understand, the law enforcement proviso is very clear. It says exactly what claims you're allowed to bring, and these are those claims. It was decided 30 years after the FTCA's discretionary function exception was enacted. And so that's the thing that should carry the day. And another thing that makes this case unique is, of course, we're often arguing against the actions of Congress at the Institute for Justice because those actions can frequently be unconstitutional. But here we actually have them behind us. And we actually also have, despite the polarized times that we live in, an amicus brief that's signed by 8 members of Congress from both parties and both houses, including Raphael Warnock on the Democrat side and Rand Paul on the Republican side. And so this is a situation where we go into the Supreme Court and say, look, we're here. The language Congress enacted is clear. And if you don't believe us, we got Raphael Warnock and Rand Paul to agree on something and to take the effort to put it in writing in a brief and submit it to this court.
Your brief mentions that wrong house raids are a recurring issue across the country and that they often end up targeting innocent families. How does this case, Martin versus United States, address this basically systemic problem?
Yeah, so I think what we talked about a little earlier is that we've found this whole hidden spate of wrong house raids that are taking place across the country, and there's simply no remedy that's being provided. In fact, we just filed a new one in North Carolina where police also raided the wrong house. And there are a lot of different reasons why those claims fail. And what this case is about is figuring out a way to stop those claims from failing when the wrong house raid is committed by federal officers. This case actually is less about wrong house raids and more about federal accountability, because the only thing left, if the federal government violates your rights and arrests you illegally or comes into your home without a warrant or anything that you kind of think of as the sort of heartland of civil rights discussion, there's really nothing you can do at this point outside of the Federal Tort Claims Act is incredibly important today because it's the last vestige of a remedy that anyone in the country has. And so the reason why this case is so important, and if you ask Trina, Toi, and Gabe, they'll tell you this, is if we win this case in what is sort of the easiest scenario possible, you have a completely innocent family minding their own business whose house gets raided because the FBI made a gigantic mistake. That means that it'll be easier for anyone whose rights are violated by federal police to come into court and have a court adjudicate the case. And so that covers anybody who falls within the definition of federal law enforcement, which is broad, and of course covers everybody from FBI agents to ATF agents, for instance, to the enforcement agents of the Postal Service or the IRS or the DEA. All of these agents right now are kind of walking around with a little constitution-free bubble around them. And if we are successful in this case, we'll be able to pop that bubble. And the other thing that should communicate to everybody is if we win this case, what the Martins are getting and what all of the people across the country whose rights would be violated are getting isn't an automatic payday of some sort. It's the ability to have a day in court. And when we're dealing with these sorts of immunity and accountability issues, that's almost always the thing that you're fighting for. It's not even to win. If we win in the Supreme Court, we'll set good law across the country, but we won't win the case at that point. What we'll get is an opportunity to have a trial.
You're arguing in front of 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court next week. Do you get nervous about that?
So this is my second time arguing, and the first time I was very nervous. This time, for some reason, I haven't been, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think one of the benefits of being able to do this civil rights work pro bono at the Institute for Justice, unlike if I were at a law firm, is that once a case gets granted for certiorari and the court's going to hear it, the Institute for Justice takes the legal team and clears the deck from all their other cases. And so basically for the last 6 weeks, all I've done is focus on this case and working out the arguments and making the best arguments and preparing for the oral argument through various moot courts that have been set up internally or externally with various groups of people. And so I'm sure the morning of, I will still be a little bit nervous in the way that, you might be nervous while you're getting ready to play a football game right before kickoff. But once the kickoff happens, I feel like the rush of adrenaline and the preparation that we spent the last couple months putting in all sort of just become second nature. And then we'll get to have our argument, and that'll be live streamed for anybody who wants to listen next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
What justices do you think will sort of grill you the hardest? And what's been your strategy for preparing for the kinds of questions that you might get?
So I think it's hard to say who will grill us the hardest. I can expect that it'll probably come from the conservative wing of the court. And, if you just look historically, I think you've got Justices Alito and Kavanaugh, who are probably the most sympathetic to policing issues. Given that we're dealing with the language of a federal statute, I think the grilling will probably be more about the interpretive issues of how this clause applies to that provision and how we should look at the broader statutory context. And I think we'll get grilled from a lot of perspectives on that front. And I think it will still come mostly from the conservative majority. Although it's hard to say. I think Justice Kagan could ask some tough questions. I suspect that Justice, Sotomayor will be kind of more on our side as she was in the Brownback versus King case. But the way that you prepare for them is, you have a lot of people pretend to be those folks and ask you difficult questions, and you try to answer them, and then you think about after the fact, how could I have answered that better, or what's the best way to deal with that? And in some of these moot courts that we hold, we're being mooted by former clerks of the Supreme Court justices or other practitioners who have recently argued in front of the justices, and so they're able to sort of put on the hats of the justices, and they're also, especially if the clerks, they're able to think about, what are these ancillary issues? Of course, like I'm focused on how do I win this case for my clients and how do I make the law better for everyone in America? But the justices are thinking about all sorts of things that most people aren't associating them with, because there are tons of cases the court decides that aren't the sort of hot button political cases that we hear about in the news. And so they might be thinking, okay, well, Patrick's here talking to me about this case against federal law enforcement officers, but maybe I'm worried that if I side with him here, it could have some impact on the way we decide administrative procedure cases or the way that we decide, contract interpretation matters. And so the best questions that kind of come out of, I think, other people talking to you or probing your arguments are the ones that you're not thinking of because it's sort of outside of the field of vision that you've created for yourself. And what you don't want to do is end up at the Supreme Court and just get blindsided by a whole line of case law that's sort of analogous to your position and difficult to overcome, but something you haven't thought about.
A lot of these stories about wrong house raids, sort of expose government abuses to people who never really, thought about it. How has public attention to cases like this through body cam footage or the media, how's that helped push for government accountability? Also, what role can, our viewers here on YouTube play in supporting this case in particular?
The spread of body cameras and dashboard cameras and cell phone cameras has been enormously valuable in this arena, because I think it's very easy, as I said earlier, to imagine something from a movie and think of the good guys and the bad guys, and you get to hear but not see from the police after the fact what happened, and they'll color things in their favor, as we've seen. But once you see the actual footage of what's happening, I think it's a lot harder to disregard what's going on. And I think it's a lot harder to disregard the trauma of those actions. If you see the body cam footage of a wrong house raid, you're going to have a visceral reaction to that. And it's not going to be one that favors the police. That being said, this case is one where there isn't body cam footage because until very recently, federal officers didn't use body cams at all. And still, it's something that's sort of slow to roll out. And so I would like to see a lot more of that. But I think that the use of cameras has really helped everybody, because it is similarly allowed police to vindicate themselves when something bad has happened, and there have been bad faith actors who rush in and try to say the police did something bad when they actually had a justification. The absolutely daily use of violent police raids is something that I think as a society we should revisit for the safety of Americans, for the safety of all the residents of this country, and for the safety of the police. It really makes very little sense in many of these cases that we deal with that you'd need to kick in the door in the middle of the night, even if you thought who was inside the house was some violent drug dealer. In many cases, it just seems to be much more practical and safe for everyone if you just wait for that person to go to the gas station to buy cigarettes and then arrest them when they're coming out of the gas station or something like that. And I've yet to really get good answers for that. I've heard from some prosecutors who've kind of seen the light on this, that a lot of the reason why they do these midnight raids is because then you get the people in there and they're completely confused in the situation, and you can interrogate them in the state of confusion, and maybe they'll say things that they wouldn't otherwise say. And if you're dealing with the federal officers, you have the 1001 criminal charges that'll stem from lying to federal officers. And so if you get someone in their underwear at 3 a.m. who just had a gun in their face and you're rapid firing questions at them that they're answering, they could say something wrong, and now you've got the leverage to do something else if they lie to you or if they say something that's untrue. And so I think there's a lot of reasons that it happens, but I think once you see the video, it becomes a lot harder to defend what's going on in many of these instances. And people on YouTube, I think we've gotten a ton of cases and a ton of support from people on YouTube seeing that and recognizing that and having that same reaction that I had, 20 years ago when Radley Balco was promoting like all these dog shooting incidents. And there's stuff that I think, you read on paper and it has one impact, but when you see it actually happening, it's a lot harder to disregard, to let go in one ear and come out the other. People getting fired up because they're seeing these videos on YouTube. People like you who are promoting these issues and explaining to people, hey, this is every day in a country where we think that we're living, the freest way that you can live. And we can do a lot better as a society by seeing what's happening and responding to the actual reality. And so YouTube has been a hugely powerful vehicle for that. Sharing videos elsewhere has been a hugely powerful vehicle for that. And of course, it also gets, the ability to reach audiences that you might not otherwise reach. And as a nonprofit, the Institute for Justice runs on donations from more than 10,000 individual contributors. And every time I talk to you about these cases and people hear about what's actually happening and see what differences that IJ can make, that we can step in and we can say, hey, look, a random practitioner somewhere in the country might not be able to spend a decade fighting the federal government, including the U.S. Solicitor General, to get to the end of the road at the Supreme Court and win. But a place like the Institute for Justice can, because we're powered by donations from people like your viewers and all of the other fine donors for the Institute for Justice that allow us to do what we do, that allow me to get up every day and help people. And I'm so thankful for that, but also to allow me to spend the last 6 weeks focusing exclusively on this case in ways that if I were at a law firm billing by the hour, I just wouldn't be able to do because of the opportunity costs. And so all these things I think are incredibly important and make possible what we get to do. And really fundamentally what we're doing is helping people who deserve the help and doing it in a way that's meant to help thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people across the country.
You guys haven't charged this family a dime.
No, and that's my favorite thing about working for the Institute for Justice is I used to be at a law firm and I did a lot of good work for a lot of good clients. And at the end of the process, they would always get a big bill. And most of them had no problem paying it, but it still didn't feel like I was helping people in the way that I get to now, which is I'll spend 5 or 10 years working in what would otherwise cost, $1 million of attorney time. I get to say, nope, not a penny. I'm going to take care of it all. If you win a big judgment, we don't take a penny of that either. The only time that we get any money from these cases is if we win attorney's fees and the government has to pay us directly. But it's an honor to be able to help people and to be able to do it for free because most of our clients could not for a second afford to pay, fancy lawyers to go to court and argue these cases because it's just incredibly expensive.
Yeah, and the briefing in this case is so incredibly complex that I can't even imagine the amount of time that you guys have put into it.
Yeah, I think, we just had a Supreme Court case last year that my colleague Anya argued. And the process, depending on how you do it, could itself cost $1 million if you went to a law firm. So especially at the level of the Supreme Court, there are big shot attorneys who argue these cases that will charge $3,000 an hour to write the brief and to argue the case. And it's great not only to beat those people in court, but also to do it and never have to charge our clients a single penny because we have so many generous donors that are able to help us defray those costs. And we keep fighting this fight that we have been since 1991.
There's no doubt in my mind that if you guys win this case, it will prevent these wrong house raids from happening to some families who are out there right now, who otherwise would have the government bust in their house and point machine guns at their kids' faces. And because right now, that's why they don't even, in my opinion, that's why they don't even bother to check the mailbox number before they go in, because they just have zero accountability and they know it. And if they get the wrong house, oh well, they just go down the street and get the next house.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the frustrating thing is that right now we live in a world where oftentimes the wrong house raid is something that happens and the victims are left to pick up the pieces. And that means, like you said, that there are a bunch of costs that exist right now. And instead of the government, the one who could have avoided this mistake, paying them, the costs are instead placed on the poor people who are doing absolutely nothing wrong and could have done nothing to avoid the situation, which I think is the thing that triggers most people the most when they hear cases like this, is they think, okay, well, that could happen to me and there's nothing I could do to avoid it. I mean, if you're going to be the victim of a wrong house raid, you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know why it's going to happen, because the reason it happens is basically chance and negligence. And in our society, the costs exist. The government who's creating those costs and who's in a position to, as you said, avoid those costs is the one that should pay for them instead of the random victims in the way that we expect that our tax dollars are going to pay the sheriff's salary instead of having a lottery every year where one unlucky winner is the one who has to pay for the sheriff's salary. And so we're trying to get the government to understand that there are those costs. And if it's the one that has to pay them, it will then take more precautions to make sure that those costs are minimized.
All right, last question. When you go up to the podium at the U.S. Supreme Court, do you have anything, like, do you bring a binder with you, or do you just like completely go with nothing?
I'm trying to remember in the case that we had together, if I took anything up there. If I take anything, it'll probably be a single sheet of paper, but I might go up there with nothing because my observation from doing, in particular, appellate law for the last decade or more is that there's kind of two types of lawyers. There's the kind that has to sort of memorize everything, and there's the kind that likes to sort of do it off the cuff. And if you're one kind of lawyer, doing it the other way tends to be more problematic than just doing it your way. And I'm a kind of off the cuff guy. So I think maybe having a little outline there as a safety blanket is good, but also going up with nothing is sort of the burn the boats situation where you just like, I know it. I've spent the last couple months preparing. And so I'll, like I said, I'll go up there with either a piece of paper or nothing at all. And if I have a paper, it's probably more so I can just write down notes to remember the questions the justices have asked for the sake of my rebuttal.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you discussing it, and I know you got a lot of work to do, so I'll let you get back to it. Good luck next week. I can't wait to listen to it. There is a link to be able to listen to the audio live.
Yeah, there will be. I'm sure IJ will have it on the website the day of, and the court itself will. And if you get up next Tuesday morning after 9 a.m. and just Google Supreme Court argument live, I'm sure you'll be able to find a bunch of different streams. C-SPAN runs it. And if you miss it live, of course, it'll all be recorded for posterity, and you can listen at your leisure.
So I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me that we're thankful that Patrick, now I think the foremost authority on the Federal Tort Claims Act, is on deck and hopefully ready to hit a home run. As I discussed at the beginning of the video, this doesn't just happen out of thin air. The Institute for Justice is funded by we the people. Remember, the FBI did not step up here and accept accountability. The government, through 2 different administrations, has not stepped up and accepted responsibility for raiding a completely innocent family's home. We have to be able to sue them when they don't. The IJ has been on top of not just wrong house raids, all sorts of First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment issues, representing for free people across the country of all different types. In previous cases that the IJ has handled, this actual YouTube audience, using my own custom donation link, has donated a tremendous amount of money to the cause. This is not just talking about it on YouTube. This is funding that fight and allowing it to happen, making new law that protects us, not the government. So if you can, please donate. The link is below in the description, and I'll also put it in the first pinned comment. Thanks again also to Incogn for being a great sponsor who joins this mission as well. Remember, our rights don't end where your fear begins. Freedom is scary. Deal with it.